immigration outcry.
We're looking to keep families together.
The president signs an executive order keeping families together at the border. Sex scandal. Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, former Archbishop of Washington, D.C., is removed from ministry. Global outrage. Nations react after the U.S. exits the United Nations Human Rights Council. On location in Mexico.
History repeats itself in many different ways.
I travel with a Polish refugee resettled by Catholic Relief Services during World War II. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, June 20th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Donald Trump signs an executive order ending the separation of children from their parents after they illegally cross the U.S. border. It's been a flashpoint in recent days, provoking outrage and emotional pleas. The president wrongly said only Congress could reverse the practice, but after a firestorm of criticism, he's taking action. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. It's a dramatic turnaround for an administration that has been insisting that it has no choice but to separate families because of the law and a court decision. The president says the zero tolerance policy will continue, but he says it's best to keep children with their parents.
We're going to have strong, very strong borders, but we're going to keep the families together. I didn't like the sight or the feeling of families being separated. There's a problem that's gone on for many years, as you know, through many administrations, and we're working very hard on immigration.
The president meeting with Republican lawmakers at the White House today. He said he is taking preemptive action to keep families together, but he's relying on Congress to pass wider immigration reform.
We have to be strong on the border, otherwise you'll have millions of people coming up, not thousands like we have now. You'll have millions of people flowing up and just overtaking the country. We're not letting that happen. So we have to be very strong on the border.
Under the administration's current policy, all illegal border crossings are referred for prosecution. Today, the president shared his personal dilemma on the immigration debate.
If you're really, really pathetically weak, the country's going to be overrun with millions of people. And if you're strong, then you don't have any heart. That's a tough dilemma. Perhaps I'd rather be strong, but that's a tough dilemma.
Today's executive order tells the Homeland Security Secretary to keep migrant families together whenever possible while they wait their court date. Lauren.
Mark, this executive order still has an exception. What is that?
The executive order states if there's any concern that a migrant parent may pose a risk to the child, then the two may still be separated for the child's welfare. Lauren.
White House correspondent Mark Irons, thank you. Congress is struggling to respond to the immigration crisis, but Speaker Paul Ryan is pushing ahead with votes on 2 GOP bills. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi questions lawmakers and a presidential advisor. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. President Trump has said he's 1,000% behind both immigration bills, but Republicans want more clarity from him. Right now, there are 2 bills on the table, a moderate one and a conservative one. Both would fund the border wall and allow children to stay with parents if they're detained at the border.
I'm a father. I would never allow my kids to be separated from me. And
Republicans insist they don't want to take children away from their parents. They're forging ahead with a vote on 2 broad immigration bills. Both allow kids to stay with their detained parents. Speaker Paul Ryan, supporting the moderate bill, gives Dreamers a pathway to citizenship.
Like I said, we're trying to pass this legislation right now. This is very good compromise legislation that not only solves the child separation issue at the border, it also solves the border. It solves DACA. It solves a lot of our broken immigration parts. So right now we're focused on passing this legislation that's coming to the floor tomorrow.
But conservative Republicans call it amnesty. Today, White House Counselor Kellyanne Conway, a faithful Catholic, says the president ran on immigration reform.
The president is very on top of this issue. We're waiting to see what Congress provides.
Will he sign either of the bills?
He said that he'll wait to see what they put on his desk.
All of the children, please come forward.
Also on Capitol Hill today, immigrant children alongside Democrats protest on the House floor. Representative Luis Gutierrez, a Democrat from Illinois, says Republicans are playing politics.
They will divide and destroy families so they can go say to their voters, see how good we are, see how mean and nasty we are, see how evil we are. Vote for us, and we will continue that.
Both House GOP bills don't appear to have the votes needed to pass. And even if Republicans manage to pass something, it's likely to fizzle in the Senate. And that chamber is looking at a standalone bill to let families stay together in custody. Lauren?
What are hardliners making of the president's decision to act on his own and let families stay together in detention?
Congressman Steve King of Iowa, Catholic, tells me he supports the order, the president's order to keep illegal immigrant families together. He says today's order would put an end to a media feeding frenzy.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. Earlier today, before the president signed the executive order, I spoke to one Republican lawmaker about the immigration legislation. Joining me now is Representative Kevin Brady, Republican from Texas, chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. Congressman Brady, welcome to the program.
Lauren, thanks for having me.
Speaker Paul Ryan says the House is going to vote on legislation tomorrow to keep families together. I've been covering this story on the ground with Border Patrol in Laredo, Texas, and in Mexico. What is the likelihood this will pass? And if it doesn't, what's your plan B?
So I'm pretty optimistic about it, and here's why. It really solves the problem in the right way. One, it closes the back door of illegal immigration and begins to fix the front door of legal immigration, including making sure that families stay together as their cases are being heard. Obviously, closing that back door is important because we've had a humanitarian crisis on the borders where families are enduring long and dangerous travels, human smuggling, sex trafficking, allowing our young people and young girls to be sexually abused on these trips. And so securing the back door or closing that back door of illegal immigration, but more importantly, keeping families together and finding a good, fair solution for the DACA dreamers, that's what this bill is all about. And I think it's a very good common ground, balanced bill.
When I was in Mexico with these young families and women, the talks about domestic abuse, violence, gang rape, human trafficking was all that I heard. Now, last night you were meeting with President Trump. What was discussed?
He strongly supports the Common Ground bill because it does build the wall, it does provide security against human trafficking, drug trafficking, sex trafficking at the border, but it really, in a humanitarian way, finds a good path forward for the DACA, the young people who were brought here, really through no choice of their own. It makes sure the families can stay together while these cases are being heard at the border, and it ends catch and release that, frankly, no one supports at all anymore. And so I think this is a good balance. The president was very clear. He's 1,000% behind this common ground proposal, and so am I.
But last time we went around this merry-go-round, we didn't get anything passed. Why are you optimistic that it will happen now?
Well, I am, because this came from the grassroots. The old Senate immigration bill was really a poorly thought out bill and had really little support from any ground. I know President Obama didn't even offer an immigration bill during the time he had the House and Senate as well. So here we are for the first time in decades with a real common sense solution that's strong on border security, fair for the DACA dreamers, and for us, for our community. In our parish, St. Simon's and Jude Catholic Church in the Woodlands, Texas, we really believe keeping families together is the right approach. This bill achieves that.
Before we let you go, another topic that is just a crisis in America is the opioid crisis. Legislation is on the floor for that. Why is it so important to bring this fight to Capitol Hill?
If you care about lives and you are trying to stop ruined lives, the opioid crisis has to be addressed. We are doing this in a big way. And many of these are bipartisan bills. There are dozens of them, including some key ones to stop smuggling of fentanyl and these opioids in the United States through the mail as well. In the approach, just very briefly, it focuses on prevention of overprescribing. It focuses on education for the patient and those who give out the opioids. But as importantly, it gives access to treatment to those who are really impacted and addicted here. So I think it's a very, again, very smart, very bipartisan. I think this can save literally hundreds of lives a day in America.
Congressman Kevin Brady, chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Lauren.
Archbishop Jose Gomez of Los Angeles is also speaking out. The leader of the country's largest diocese says immigrants are a blessing to our country.
We need to find a solution for the movements of people. And separating people is not the right way to do it. We can find the solution and have a good immigration system that allows us to protect our borders and at the same time that people can move.
Archbishop Gomez says every human life is sacred, even if that person has broken the law. Pope Francis is criticizing the Trump administration's former policy, of separating immigrant children from their parents who have crossed the border illegally. Francis made the comments at his residence in an exclusive interview with Reuters news agency. That wasn't the only topic discussed. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliet, the Holy Father is weighing in on the U.S. decision to separate families coming into the Texas border. Reuters quotes the Pope saying it is not just about Trump. What does that mean?
Well, Pope Francis said that he supports recent statements by the U.S. Catholic bishops who called the separation of children from their parents immoral and, quote, contrary to our Catholic values. The Pope says he's on the side of the bishops in terms of condemning the policy to criminally prosecute illegal immigrants and to separate them from their children.
This was a wide-ranging interview that didn't just talk about immigration, but a possible deal on bishops' appointments between China and the Holy See. We've had Cardinal Zen on our air to talk about this. Tell me what the prospects are for a deal.
Indeed, Lauren. So Francis rejects the notion that he's selling out the Catholics in China. They're loyal to Rome. And now let's remember that the Catholic Church in China is divided between an official church controlled by the communist government and an underground one that's loyal to the Holy See. Now, currently, the Vatican only officially recognizes bishops appointed by the Holy Father, and the Pope says the main obstacle is the appointment of bishops. However, in the interview, he talks about the talks being at a good point, in quotation marks.
Also, on retiring, we hear the Pope say this all the time. You know, Pope Benedict made history 5 years ago when he resigned. What is Pope Francis saying now about stepping down?
Well, the Holy Father again reiterated that he may one day, for health reasons, decide to resign, but he said, quote, right now, I'm not even thinking about it. Now, the Pope suffers from leg pain linked to problems with his back, but nothing more seriously on the medical front, Lauren.
The role of women in the church. In this Reuters interview, the Pope expounds on that. Tell me what he said.
That's right, Lauren. The Holy Father says he wants to appoint more women to head Vatican departments. Francis says that he feels women are better at, quote, resolving conflicts, which is interesting. And he went on to say that that doesn't mean that women have to become like men in order to be put in leadership positions.
Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren.
The retired Archbishop of Washington, D.C. is removed from public ministry over allegations he sexually abused a teenager in New York more than 40 years ago. The church says the allegations against 87-year-old Cardinal Theodore McCarrick were found to be credible and that Pope Francis ordered his removal. He was Archbishop of Washington from 2000 to 2006 and a priest in New York from 1958 to 1981. In a statement, McCarrick says, quote, while I have absolutely no recollection of this reported abuse and believe in my innocence, I am sorry for the pain the person who brought the charges has gone through, as well as for the scandal such charges cause our people. Separately, the Archdiocese of Newark, where McCarrick was a bishop, says it previously settled 2 allegations of sexual misconduct involving adults. Coming up, Rohingya refugees make an appeal to the international community. Plus, an international Catholic organization shares a tool to support refugees. Top members of the Trump administration are defending a controversial decision to pull the U.S. out of the United Nations main human rights group. Officials are accusing the Human Rights Council of failing to live up to its name. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. National Security Advisor John Bolton is the latest member of the administration to voice his support for UN Ambassador Nikki Haley and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Bolton says we don't need advice on this issue from the UN. This less than 24 hours after Haley laid out all of her concerns with the UN's human rights watchdog group.
The United States is officially withdrawing from the UN Human Rights Council.
U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley says their decision is not a knee-jerk reaction, but comes after months of calls for reform.
I want to make it crystal clear that this step is not a retreat from human rights commitments. On the contrary, we take this step because our commitment does not allow us to remain a part of a hypocritical and self-serving organization.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo also voiced his support for the decision.
It is a massive source of embarrassment to the United Nations that some governments with egregious human rights records sit on the Human Rights Council.
The U.S. is highlighting 4 members on the council. China, a country Amnesty International notes in the last year, quote, repression of religious activities outside state-sanctioned churches increased. Cuba, where human rights and political activists continue to be harassed, intimidated, and arbitrarily detained in high numbers. Venezuela, where human rights defenders were harassed, intimidated, and subject to raids. And the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where there is a crackdown on the rights to freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly. Despite all the accusations, the president of the UN group is defending his organization.
Let me say it very clearly. If human rights issues are not discussed here, in this very room, they have little chance to be dealt with meaningfully anywhere else.
The Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, says he would have preferred the U.S. remain part of the Human Rights Council. The announcement comes after a high-ranking human rights official criticized the Trump administration this week for their previous plan to separate children from their parents on the U.S.-Mexico border. Lauren?
White, the Trump administration is facing criticism from countries like Russia and China, but one big supporter of this move is Israel. Why?
Well, Lauren, the Human Rights Council has been very critical of the state of Israel for a long time. Nikki Haley actually talked about this, saying that they have an anti-Israel bias. They regularly pass items that criticize Israel. And in response, the Israeli Prime Minister has responded to the council saying that Israel is the one genuine democracy in the Middle East. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. Rohingya Muslims in Bangladesh demand Myanmar be held accountable for driving them into exile. More than 100 members of the religious minority voiced their suffering and accused Myanmar's government of committing a genocide. They are calling on international organizations to bring justice to their people. Some 700,000 Rohingya fled brutal attacks last year in Myanmar for neighboring Bangladesh. As the Vatican marks World Refugee Day today, a Catholic leader says education about the issue is key.
Education gives young people the opportunity to think differently, to imagine a different future, to have the kind of education that gives them hope, that gives them stability, allows them to find work, that puts food on the table, sends their children to school.
Jesuit Refugee Services is an international Catholic organization providing assistance to refugees and asylum seekers. In 2016, JRS helped more than 700 individuals. Up next, the Holy Father's take on achieving true freedom. And I accompany a former Polish refugee as he revisits the Catholic shelter where he took refuge after escaping a Russian gulag. Pope Francis says following God's commandments sets us free.
Dio è padrone o padre?
At his weekly audience, the Holy Father says God is our Father and we should never forget it. And his commandments are not orders, but an invitation to build a relationship with God. The Pope said that is the path to human fulfillment. And finally tonight, a heartwarming story that takes us back in time. Catholic Relief Services has been operating around the world for 75 years. It was founded as War Relief Services by the U.S. bishops. Its very first project, the Santa Rosa Colony, began in León, Guanajuato, in central Mexico. It welcomed hundreds of Polish immigrants seeking asylum during World War II. Tonight, we take you to the Mexican colony with one of the very first immigrants CRS served.
So we're about 5 miles out.
It was a day of great emotion for Ulick Plowey.
Here's some train tracks, like the ones you must have come in on. What are your thoughts being here?
Well, we didn't know what we were facing. Didn't know whether the people would welcome us or it was another internment camp.
As a toddler, he was rescued from a World War II Siberian death camp by Catholic Relief Services.
We saw our friends and neighbors and family die. And all of them were dying in the gulags. So, you build a hatred within you, not wanting to, but you do that. Just provided hope.
Now 78, he drops to his knees, returning to the home that gave him and his family hope and faith in humanity. With his wife by his side, he shares his memories.
I remember the columns.
Catholic Relief Services brought him and 1,500 other Polish refugees to this makeshift camp.
Yeah, I remember running around it.
Ulick, his mother and sister stayed for 4 years. He can't help but think about the current world refugee crisis.
These little boys, that one over there can't be much older than you were.
History repeats itself in many different ways for evil reasons, and we don't learn. So what can we do to learn? It starts with faith and the love of God.
You live here?
I lived here for 4 years.
Father Pedro Gonzalez Valenzuela runs what is now a home for at-risk Mexican boys.
Thank you. It's your house. This is your house.
Ulick and his family moved to the United States in 1947. He received a Catholic education, served in the Marine Corps, and had a successful career as a businessman. He believes his experience could be a model for today's immigration crisis.
We share a lot of things in common, the Polish people and the Mexican people. Yes. We share a faith, and we suffer the same. And so we consider you brothers and sisters. Thank you for accepting me.
Lo primero que se hizo.
Bishop Alfonso Miranda, Secretary General of the Mexican Bishops' Conference, agrees.
If we don't think like brothers, like we are brothers, the countries, the humankind won't succeed.
What do you think about being here?
Well, this is a personal, amazing experience. Warming, moving experience that I never thought would happen.
For Ulick, the journey on this summer day reminds him, 75 years later, how lucky he was to have been blessed by Catholic Relief Services when he was a little boy in peril. That does it for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.